Vincent Ross knew exactly which seat would creak in the concert hall. Row M, seat 14. He'd been sitting in press sections for 35 years, and he could tell you which venues had the best acoustics, which ones served stale coffee during intermission, and which conductors would go 15 minutes over their scheduled time. Tonight was a Tuesday. Symphony performance, Beethoven's Fifth. Again. He pulled out his worn leather notebook, the one with coffee stains on the cover and pages filled with shorthand only he could decode. His pen moved across the paper before the orchestra even started. He already knew what he'd write. Competent performance. Technically sound but lacking innovation. The usual words that filled his column in the Metropolitan Daily. The lights dimmed. The audience settled into that expectant silence. Vincent felt nothing. He used to feel something. A long time ago, when he was 23 and attending his first professional concert as a junior critic, his hands had actually shaken with excitement. Now, at 58, his hands only shook if he skipped his morning coffee. The music began. His pen scratched against paper. Tempo, dynamics, interpretation. All the technical elements that readers pretended to understand. Vincent had perfected the art of writing reviews that sounded profound, but said very little. The orchestra navigated Beethoven's complex emotional landscape with measured precision, he wrote. What did that even mean? He wasn't sure anymore, but it sounded good. 2 hours later, he was back in his car, driving through the city streets to his apartment in the quiet part of town. The same route he always took. Past the Thai restaurant that stayed open late, past the corner store with the flickering neon sign, past the park where people walked their dogs even at this hour. His apartment was exactly as he'd left it. Clean, organized, empty. Vincent heated up leftover Chinese food in the microwave and ate it standing at the kitchen counter. The silence didn't bother him anymore. He'd gotten used to it after the divorce. That was 8 years ago. Rebecca had taken most of the furniture, which he'd actually appreciated. Less to dust, less to remind him of what he'd lost. She'd told him once near the end. You analyze everything, Vincent. You've forgotten how to just feel. He disagreed at the time, argued that analysis was important, that critical thinking was his job. But late at night, when he couldn't sleep, her words sometimes echoed in his mind. His phone sat on the counter, silent. His daughter Nina used to call every Sunday. Then it became every other Sunday. Now it was maybe once a month if he was lucky. She was 26, living across the country, building her own life. He couldn't blame her. He'd spent her childhood in concert halls and theaters, reviewing other people's art while missing her school plays and piano recitals. The irony wasn't lost on him. A music critic who'd missed his own daughter's music performances. Vincent finished his food, rinsed the container, and sat down at his computer to write the review. His fingers moved automatically across the keyboard. Same phrases he'd used 100 times before, just rearranged slightly. He hit send and closed his laptop. The piano in the corner of his living room sat untouched, covered with a thin layer of dust. He used to play every day. That was before music became work. Before every note had to be analyzed, every performance had to be judged. He couldn't remember the last time he'd played just for the joy of it. Wednesday morning arrived with gray skies and the smell of rain. Vincent's editor, Tom, called him into the office. Tom was one of those perpetually cheerful people who drank green smoothies and talked about team synergy. Vincent tolerated him. I've got a special assignment for you, Tom said, sliding a folder across his desk. Community outreach piece, local music program for underprivileged kids. Very heartwarming stuff, perfect for the Sunday edition. Vincent picked up the folder without enthusiasm. You want me to cover amateur hour? I want you to cover a story about music bringing communities together. Human interest angle. You know, feel-good content. Our readers eat this stuff up. Tom, I review professional performances, symphony orchestras, opera companies. Not what? Not real music. Tom leaned back in his chair. Vincent, when's the last time you wrote something that made people actually feel something? Your reviews are technically perfect, but they're cold. Distant. This could be good for you. Vincent wanted to argue, but Tom was right. His reviews had become mechanical. He knew it, everyone knew it. But changing felt impossible. This was who he was now. When is it? Vincent asked, resigned. Saturday evening, church basement in the Riverside neighborhood. 6 o'clock. Don't be late. Vincent spent the next few days going through the motions. Thursday brought a jazz quartet that played competently but safely. Friday featured a piano recital by a young performer who had technique but no soul. He wrote both reviews in under an hour. Saturday arrived too quickly. Vincent considered calling in sick, but he'd never missed an assignment in 35 years. His professional reputation was the only thing he had left. He drove to the Riverside neighborhood, an area he rarely visited. The streets were different here, narrower, more colorful. Small shops with signs in different languages lined the blocks. Kids played on stoops. People actually talked to their neighbors. The church was small and weathered, with paint peeling from the doorframe. Vincent parked and sat in his car for a moment. Through the basement windows he could see people gathering. Families mostly. Parents holding younger children's hands. Teenagers carrying instrument cases covered in stickers. He checked his watch. 5:58. Vincent grabbed his notebook and walked toward the church entrance. He could hear sounds coming from the basement. Not music yet. Just the chaos of people tuning instruments, moving chairs, laughing and talking. He descended the stairs into a basement that smelled like coffee and old books. Folding chairs were arranged in uneven rows. A makeshift stage consisted of a slightly raised platform with a wobbly microphone stand. This was about as far from the concert halls he knew as you could get. A woman with kind eyes approached him. "Are you Vincent Ross from the newspaper? Thank you so much for coming. The kids are so excited to have a real critic here." Vincent forced a smile. A real critic. In a church basement, watching amateur performances by children who probably couldn't tell a crescendo from a decrescendo. He found a seat in the back row and opened his notebook. 2 hours, he told himself. 2 hours, and he could go home. Write a polite review, fulfill his obligation, and get back to real music. The lights dimmed slightly. The performance was about to begin. Vincent had no idea that everything was about to change. The first performer was a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. He dragged a cello that was almost as tall as he was across the makeshift stage. The instrument had seen better days. Scratches covered its surface, and one of the tuning pegs had been replaced with something that didn't quite match. Vincent watched as the boy struggled to position himself. His feet dangled above the floor. Someone rushed forward with a phone book to prop under his chair. The audience chuckled warmly. Vincent didn't smile. He was already mentally composing his review. Well-intentioned but lacking fundamental technical foundation, the boy began to play. It was rough. Very rough. His bow scraped across the strings at awkward angles. He missed notes. His rhythm wandered like a lost tourist. But his parents in the front row leaned forward with pride written all over their faces. His mother held her phone up, recording every second. Vincent wrote, "Beginner-level performance. Needs significant instruction in basic technique." Next came a trio of teenagers playing guitars, 2 acoustic, 1 electric that kept cutting out because of a faulty cable. They performed a pop song that Vincent vaguely recognized from the radio. One of them forgot the chords halfway through and had to restart. The audience clapped anyway, encouraging them. Vincent's pen moved across the page. Unprepared. Lack of rehearsal evident. Poor equipment maintenance. A middle-aged woman sang an aria. She had a decent voice actually, but no formal training. Her vibrato wobbled uncertainly. She reached for high notes that stayed just out of her grasp. Still, something in her performance suggested she'd been practicing for weeks, maybe months. This was probably a big moment for her. Vincent wrote, "Enthusiasm cannot substitute for proper vocal training." He glanced at his watch. 45 minutes down. How many more performers could there be? The woman who'd greeted him earlier stepped onto the stage. She wore a simple dress and had flour on her sleeve, like she'd come straight from baking. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said into the microphone, which squeaked with feedback. "This program means everything to our community. For many of these families, music lessons aren't something they can afford. But music, real music, shouldn't only belong to people with money." Vincent shifted in his seat. He wasn't here for a speech. He was here to observe and leave. We have students from 7 different countries here tonight, she continued. Music is the language that brings us together. It helps us tell our stories when words aren't enough. The audience applauded. Vincent didn't. He'd heard variations of this speech 1,000 times. Music is universal language. Music is bridge between cultures. Pretty words that looked good in program notes but didn't change the fact that what he'd witnessed so far was objectively subpar. Our next performer, the woman said, her voice softening, came to us 6 months ago speaking almost no English. She's 12 years old. She'd never touched a violin before joining our program. Tonight she's going to play something she composed herself. A girl walked onto the stage and Vincent sat up slightly. She was small for 12, thin with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She carried a violin that was clearly borrowed, probably from the program. Her hands shook as she positioned the instrument under her chin. Vincent had seen nervous performers before. They usually rushed through their pieces, desperate for it to be over. He prepared himself for another rough performance. The girl stood there for a moment, not playing, just breathing. The audience waited patiently. Vincent tapped his pen against his notebook, impatient. Then she began. The first few notes were tentative, careful. Exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd only been playing 6 months. Vincent started writing his critique. Limited technical ability. Needs years of fundamental training before attempting original composition. But something made him pause. The girl wasn't playing for the audience. She wasn't even playing for herself. She was playing for someone who wasn't there. Her eyes were closed. Tears ran down her face, but she kept going. The melody was simple, almost primitive. She hit wrong notes. Her bowing wasn't smooth, but the music told a story that Vincent could feel even through the technical imperfections. It spoke of leaving, of missing, of home being somewhere you could never return to. Vincent's pen stopped moving. The girl played a phrase that went up, reaching, searching for something. Then it fell back down, resigned. She repeated this pattern. But each time the reaching went a little higher, the falling a little softer, like hope learning to survive disappointment. Around him, Vincent noticed other people crying too. A man in the front row wiped his eyes. A teenager near the window had her hand over her mouth. This wasn't about technique. This wasn't about training or proper vibrato or any of the 100 things Vincent usually judged. This was something else entirely. The girl played a section that sounded almost like a lullaby. Vincent felt something crack inside his chest. When was the last time Rebecca had hummed to Nina? When was the last time he'd held his daughter and just let himself feel love without analyzing it, without worrying about the next deadline or the next review? The melody shifted. It became less sad. Not happy exactly, but different, like someone learning to breathe in a new place, like someone finding small pieces of hope in unexpected corners. Vincent realized his vision was blurring. He blinked, confused. Was he crying? He hadn't cried in years. Not at his divorce. Not when his father died. Not through thousands of performances that were technically perfect but emotionally empty. But here, in a church basement, watching a 12-year-old girl play a borrowed violin badly, tears were streaming down his face. She played one particular note, holding it longer than the others. It wavered, imperfect, human, and in that wavering note, Vincent heard everything he'd been holding back for decades. Loneliness, regret, the weight of all the moments he'd observed instead of lived. The girl finished. The last note faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the audience erupted into applause. They stood up, cheering. The girl opened her eyes, surprised by the response. She looked scared and proud and relieved all at once. Vincent couldn't stand. He couldn't move. He sat there with tears running down his face, his notebook forgotten on his lap. The woman who'd introduced the performers came over to him during the intermission. "Are you okay?" she asked, concerned. "I don't know," Vincent said honestly. It was the most truthful thing he'd said in years. "That was Layla," the woman told him. "She's from Syria. She came here with her grandmother after..." She paused, "after losing everyone else. The piece she played, she calls it the Song of What Remains. She says it's about carrying pieces of home in your heart." Vincent wiped his face with the back of his hand. "How long has she been here?" "In America? 8 months. In our program? 6 months. She practices every day after school." 2 hours, sometimes 3. The violin is all she has from before. Well, the idea of it. The actual violin belongs to the program. She's never had formal lessons, just what we can offer here. We have volunteers, but none of them are professional musicians. We do our best. Vincent looked at his notebook. At all the critical comments he'd written. Beginner level. Lacks training. Technically inadequate. All true. All completely missing the point. Can I? Vincent started, then stopped. Can I talk to her? Of course. She'd probably love that. A real music critic wanting to talk to her? Vincent almost laughed. A real music critic. He'd spent 35 years being a real music critic, and in 35 years, he'd never heard anything like what he'd just heard. The second half of the performance continued, but Vincent barely noticed. His mind kept replaying that one wavering note, the one that had broken through decades of carefully constructed walls. Something had shifted, something fundamental, and Vincent had no idea what to do about it. Vincent sat in his car for 20 minutes after the performance ended. The steering wheel felt cold under his hands. Through the rearview mirror, he could see families leaving the church, children running ahead while parents followed with instrument cases. He'd talked to Layla briefly before leaving. She'd been shy, speaking in careful English with her grandmother translating some parts. "Did you like my song?" she'd asked, and Vincent had found himself speechless. What could he say? That it was technically flawed? That she needed years of training? Those words felt hollow now, almost cruel. It was real, he'd finally managed. It was the most real thing I've heard in a very long time. Layla had smiled, and her grandmother had squeezed Vincent's hand. "Thank you for listening," the older woman had said. Really listening. Now, sitting. In his car, Vincent couldn't stop thinking about those words. Really listening. When had he stopped really listening? When had music become just a checklist of technical elements to evaluate? He drove home on autopilot, his mind elsewhere. Inside his apartment, he made coffee even though it was almost 10 at night. He opened his laptop. The blank document stared at him, cursor blinking. Vincent had written thousands of reviews. The words usually flowed easily. But tonight his fingers hovered over the keyboard, not typing. He thought about the 8-year-old with the oversized cello, the teenagers with their faulty cable, the woman reaching for notes she couldn't quite hit. In his mind he heard his own critical voice dismissing them all. Unprepared, amateur, lacking fundamentals. But he also remembered the pride on those parents' faces. The way the teenagers had laughed when they messed up and started over. The determination in that woman's eyes. And Layla. That one note she'd held, wavering and imperfect and absolutely devastating. Vincent started typing. "I went to the Riverside Community Music Program expecting very little. I am a professional critic. I have spent 35 years in concert halls where orchestras play Beethoven and Mozart with precision. I have listened to virtuosos who can make their instruments sing in ways that seem impossible. I thought I knew what good music was. I was wrong. Tonight I heard a 12-year-old girl play a borrowed violin. She hit wrong notes. Her technique was rough. By every objective measure I've used for 3 decades, it was an imperfect performance. And it destroyed me. Because somewhere, along the way, I forgot that music isn't about perfection. It's about truth. It's about a girl from Syria playing a song about losing everything and finding the courage to keep going anyway. It's about parents who can't afford music lessons but believe their children deserve beauty in their lives. It's about a community that gathers in a church basement because they understand something I'd forgotten. Music isn't meant to be judged. It's meant to be felt. I sat in that church basement tonight with tears streaming down my face, and I realized that in 35 years of reviewing perfect performances, I haven't cried once. I haven't felt anything. I've analyzed and critiqued and maintained professional distance, and in the process, I've lost the very thing that made me love music in the first place. The young performer tonight, Layla, played one note that will stay with me forever. It wasn't perfect. It wavered. But in that imperfection, I heard more honesty than in 1,000 technically flawless concerts. Maybe we've been thinking about music all wrong. Maybe it's not about how well you play. Maybe it's about having something to say and finding the courage to say it. Vincent stopped typing. He read what he'd written. It was nothing like his usual reviews. It was personal, vulnerable. His editor would probably hate it. He hit send anyway. Then he sat there, staring at his laptop, wondering what he'd just done. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Vincent lay in bed replaying the evening over and over. That wavering note, Layla's tears, the crack in his own chest that seemed to keep widening. His phone rang at 8 in the morning. Tom, his editor. "Vincent, what the hell was that?" Vincent sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What?" "That review you sent. That wasn't a review." "That was. I don't even know what that was. I know it's different. If you want me to rewrite it." "Different?" "Vincent, my inbox is exploding. I posted it on our website at 6 this morning and it's already been shared 5,000 times. People are crying. Actual crying. One woman wrote to say she's going to sign her daughter up for music lessons because of what you wrote." Vincent felt dizzy. "Shared? 5,000 times? Try 10,000 now. It's going viral." The paper's website crashed twice already. Everyone wants to know who this critic is who finally wrote something honest. For the rest of the day, Vincent watched his phone light up with notifications. His review was everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, news websites picking it up. People were commenting, sharing their own stories about music and loss and finding hope. Someone had tracked down the community program and started a fundraiser. By evening, they'd raised $40,000 for instruments and teachers. Vincent felt like he'd stepped into an alternate reality. This wasn't supposed to happen. A review about a church basement performance wasn't supposed to change anything. But something had changed. In him, most of all. That night, Vincent did something he hadn't done in 6 months. He called his daughter. "Dad?" Nina answered, surprised. "Is everything okay?" "I don't know," Vincent said honestly. "Can we talk?" There was a pause. "Yeah, of course. What's going on?" Vincent told her everything. About the performance, about Layla, about crying in a church basement, about the review and the response. Nina listened without interrupting. "Dad," she said when he finished, "do you remember my 6th grade piano recital?" Vincent's throat tightened. "No, I don't. I'm sorry." "I played a piece I'd been practicing for months. I was so nervous I looked for you in the audience, but you weren't there. You were reviewing some symphony." "Nina, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I need you to know that I understand what you wrote about forgetting to feel things, because I watched you do that my whole childhood. You were there, but you weren't really there." "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Nina was quiet for a moment. "Why are you calling me now? After 6 months?" "Because tonight, a 12-year-old girl reminded me what I've lost, and the first thing I thought about was you. All the moments I missed, all the times I chose to analyze instead of just be present. So what are you going to do about it?" Vincent looked at the piano in the corner of his living room, still covered in dust. "I don't know yet, but I want to try. If you'll let me, I want to be a better father. Even if I'm decades too late." "It's never too late, Dad." Nina's voice cracked slightly. "But I need you to actually mean it this time. No more disappearing into your work. No more emotional distance. I mean it. I promise." They talked for 2 hours. Really talked. Maybe for the first time in years. Nina told him about her job, about the guy she'd been dating, about her struggles with anxiety that Vincent never knew about because he'd never asked. When they finally hung up, Vincent felt exhausted and hopeful at the same time. He walked over to the piano. He lifted the cover and wiped away the dust. The keys were yellowed with age, but when he pressed one, it still made a sound. Vincent sat down. His fingers found the keys hesitant at first. He couldn't remember the last time he'd played. The notes came out stiff and uncertain, but he kept playing. Just simple melodies, nothing fancy, nothing that needed to be reviewed or critiqued or judged. Just music for the sake of making sound. For the sake of feeling something. Outside his window, the city continued its usual rhythm. But inside, Something fundamental had shifted. The walls Vincent had spent 35 years building were coming down, one note at a time. And for the first time in decades, he wasn't afraid of what that meant. The next few weeks felt like living in someone else's life. Vincent kept going to concerts, kept writing reviews, but something had fundamentally broken. Or maybe fixed. He couldn't tell which. At a prestigious opera house, watching a soprano hit every note perfectly, Vincent found himself unmoved. Technically flawless. Emotionally empty. He wrote the review, but his heart wasn't in it. Tom noticed. "Your recent reviews are different," he said one morning. "Not bad, just different, more personal. Less technical. People are responding to it." Vincent didn't know what to say. He felt like he was learning a new language, one he used to speak fluently before forgetting it completely. He thought about the community center constantly. About Layla and her borrowed violin, about music that meant something beyond perfect execution. Finally, 3 weeks after that Saturday night, he drove back to the Riverside neighborhood. The woman who ran the program, Diane, looked surprised to see him. "Vincent, did you need something for a follow-up article? Actually, I was wondering if you needed any help. Volunteers, I could..." He trailed off, suddenly feeling foolish. "I don't know. Maybe teach some basics? I used to play piano. A long time ago." Diane's face lit up. "Are you serious? We're desperate for volunteers who actually know music. Most of our helpers are just parents with good intentions but no training. I should warn you, I haven't taught anyone in decades. I might be terrible at it. You couldn't be worse than me trying to explain tempo." Diane laughed. "Can you start next Saturday?" Vincent started volunteering every Saturday afternoon. The first day was harder than he expected. He was used to critiquing performances, not actually helping people improve. When a 10-year-old boy struggled with a simple scale on the keyboard, Vincent's first instinct was to list everything wrong. "Your hand position is incorrect. Your timing is off. You're not watching the keys properly." The boy's face fell. He pulled his hands back from the keyboard. Diane pulled Vincent aside. "These kids don't need critics. They need encouragement. Save the technical stuff for later. Right now, they just need to feel like they can do it." Vincent tried again. "Hey, let's try something. Don't worry about getting it perfect. Just feel the rhythm, like this." He played the scale slowly, emphasizing the beat. "Now you try. And if you mess up, who cares? Just keep going." The boy tried again. He still made mistakes, but this time he smiled. It was a small moment, but Vincent felt something shift. Teaching wasn't about pointing out flaws. It was about helping someone find their own voice, but the transformation wasn't easy. Some days, Vincent caught himself falling back into old patterns, analyzing instead of encouraging, judging instead of supporting. Old habits fought back hard. One evening, he sat with Layla during a break. She was practicing the same piece, trying to smooth out the rough spots. "It sounds much better," Vincent told her. "You've been working hard." "My grandmother says I should play something classical next time," Layla said quietly. "Something real musicians play, not my own songs." "Why does she think that?" "Because my songs are not good enough." "Not like real music?" Vincent felt anger rise in his chest, but not at Layla or her grandmother. At himself. At years of making people feel like their music wasn't valid unless it met certain standards. "Layla, listen to me. That song you played, the one you wrote yourself, that was more real than 90% of the performances I've reviewed in my entire career. Don't let anyone, including me, tell you that your music isn't good enough. But I make so many mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. The greatest musicians in the world make mistakes. The difference is whether your music means something, whether it comes from here." He pointed to his chest. "Your music does. Don't lose that trying to be perfect." Layla nodded slowly, considering his words. At home, Vincent's relationship with Nina was slowly, carefully rebuilding. She came to visit one weekend, the first time in over 2 years. They walked through the park near his apartment, talking about everything and nothing. "I read all your recent reviews," Nina said. "They're really different from before. Good different or bad different?" "Honest different. It's like you finally decided to be a person instead of a reviewing machine." She paused. "Dad, what happened, really?" Vincent told her about that moment in the church basement. About the note that broke through his defenses. About realizing he'd spent 35 years hiding from feeling anything. "I don't know if I can fix everything I've broken," he admitted. "I missed so much of your life. I can't get that back." "No, you can't," Nina agreed. "But you're here now. That's something. They sat on a bench watching ducks in the pond. Vincent wanted to apologize again, but Nina had heard enough apologies. What she needed was consistency, proof that this change was real. "Are you happy, Nina?" he asked instead. She thought about it. "Most days. I still struggle with anxiety. Therapy helps. I wish I'd started going years ago, but I thought I could handle it myself." "I didn't know you were in therapy." "Because we didn't talk about real things, Dad. We talked about surface stuff. Safe stuff. But never about what actually mattered." Vincent felt that familiar ache in his chest. All the missed conversations. All the walls he'd built. "Tell me about your therapy," he said. "If you want to." Nina looked surprised, then smiled. "Okay, yeah, I'd like that." They talked until the sun started setting. Real conversation, the kind they should have been having for years. Back at the community center, Vincent started playing piano during practice sessions. At first, just simple accompaniment for students. Then when Diane asked if he'd perform at the next recital, he almost said no. "I don't perform. I review performances." "Maybe it's time to try something new," Diane suggested. "The kids would love it. And honestly, I think you need it." Vincent practiced at home every night. His fingers were stiff at first, muscle memory buried under years of disuse. He chose a simple piece, nothing fancy, but even simple felt terrifying. What if he messed up? What if people judged him the way he'd judged thousands of performers? The irony wasn't lost on him. After decades of criticism, he was terrified of being on the receiving end. Nina called him one night while he was practicing. "Is that you playing?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm performing at the community center next month." "Dad, that's amazing. Can I come watch?" Vincent's first instinct was to say no, to keep her away from potential embarrassment. But he caught himself. "I'd really like that," he said instead. "I'll probably make mistakes." "Good, you should make mistakes. You're human." His boss, Tom, started assigning him different kinds of stories. Not just professional concerts, but music programs in schools, community bands, amateur theater productions. Vincent found he preferred these assignments. The music might be less polished, but the stories were more interesting. He wrote about a 70-year-old man learning guitar after retirement, about teenagers starting a band in their garage, about a church choir that sang off-key but showed up every Sunday anyway. His reviews became conversations about why music mattered. Not just whether it was technically good, but some nights, Vincent lay awake wondering if this transformation was real or temporary. What if he slipped back into old patterns? What if he hurt Nina again? What if he let down the kids at the community center? Change was messier than he'd expected. Some days felt like progress. Other days he caught himself being critical and had to consciously adjust. Recovery from 35 years of emotional distance didn't happen overnight. He started seeing a therapist. It felt strange at first, talking about feelings with a professional. But slowly, session by session, he began understanding how he'd built those walls, how his fear of being hurt had turned him into someone who observed life instead of living it. "You're grieving," his therapist told him. "Grieving all the years you lost. That's healthy. Let yourself feel it." So Vincent did. He let himself feel the regret, the sadness, the anger at himself. And slowly, underneath all that, he found something else. Hope. Small and fragile, but real. The recital was coming. Vincent practiced his piece every day. His fingers still stumbled sometimes, but he was getting better. More importantly, he was learning to be okay with imperfection. One Saturday after practice, Layla came up to him. "Mr. Vincent, thank you for telling me my music was real. I'm going to play my own song at the next recital. A new one I wrote." "What's it about?" Vincent asked. "About finding a new home. It's still sad sometimes, but also happy." "Is that okay?" "That's perfect," Vincent told her. "That's exactly what music should be." Walking to his car that evening, Vincent realized something. He was happy. Not perfectly happy, not without complications or regrets, but genuinely happy in a way he hadn't been in decades. The walls were coming down, slowly, painfully but surely. And that one wavering note from weeks ago still echoed in his mind, reminding him why any of this mattered at all. 6 months had passed since that Saturday night in the church basement. Vincent stood backstage at the year-end recital, hands trembling, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. The same church basement, but transformed. Someone had hung string lights across the ceiling. Fresh flowers sat on the piano. Every seat was filled with people standing along the back wall. The fundraiser from Vincent's viral review had brought in enough money for new instruments, and tonight was the celebration. Vincent peeked through the curtain. Nina sat in the third row, smiling at something on her phone, probably texting her boyfriend, the one Vincent had actually met last month over dinner. They'd talked about music and movies and normal things. It had been nice. Surprisingly easy. His ex-wife Rebecca was there too. Nina had invited her and Vincent had agreed. They'd spoken briefly before the show, the first real conversation they'd had since the divorce. She'd looked at him with something like curiosity. "Nina says you've changed," Rebecca had said. "I'm trying to," Vincent had replied. "I know that doesn't fix anything." "No, it doesn't, but it's something." Now Diane appeared beside him, clipboard in hand. "You ready? You're up after the intermediate group." "I don't think I'll ever be ready," Vincent admitted. "Good. That means it matters to you." She squeezed his shoulder. "You've been amazing with these kids. They look up to you." Vincent watched the intermediate group perform, a quartet playing a pop song, much better than the teenagers with the faulty cable 6 months ago. These kids had benefited from the new funding, from better instruments and more structured lessons. But Vincent had learned something important over these months. Better equipment and training were valuable, but they weren't everything. What mattered was whether someone had something to say. The quartet finished. Applause filled the room. Diane walked onto the stage. "Our next performer has been with us for 6 months as a volunteer. He's taught piano to our beginners, mentored our composers, and reminded all of us why we do this. Vincent Ross will play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major." Vincent walked onto the stage. The lights were brighter than he remembered. Every face in the audience suddenly seemed to be looking directly at him. He sat at the piano. The keys felt familiar now after months of daily practice, but his heart still hammered in his chest. This was different from reviewing. When you reviewed, you could hide behind words, point out what others did wrong. But performing? Performing meant being vulnerable, being seen, possibly failing in front of everyone. Vincent placed his fingers on the keys. He thought about Layla, about that wavering note that had changed everything, about imperfection being okay, about music being truth, not perfection. He began to play. The first few measures came out stiff. His fingers felt thick, clumsy. He missed a note in the 4th bar and winced. But he kept going, just like he'd told the kids to do. "Don't stop." Feel the music slowly, something shifted. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing steadied. The music started flowing instead of being forced. He thought about Nina, about all the recitals he'd missed, about sitting in concert halls judging strangers instead of being present for his own daughter. This piece was for her, an apology in musical form. Vincent made more mistakes, several of them. But somewhere around the middle of the piece he stopped caring. He was just playing, just feeling the music move through him. When the final note faded, there was a moment of silence. Then applause. Nina was on her feet, clapping hard, tears on her face. Rebecca was clapping too. So was everyone else. Vincent stood, took an awkward bow, and walked off stage feeling lighter than he had in years. The rest of the recital was beautiful. The 8-year-old boy with the cello played a simple folk song perfectly. The woman who'd sung the shaky aria 6 months ago performed an art song with new confidence. Every performance showed growth, showed practice, showed people believing in themselves a little more. Then Diane announced the final performer. Layla has been with us for almost a year now. Tonight she'll play an original composition called The Song of New Roots. Layla walked onto the stage. She looked taller than 6 months ago, more confident. She still carried the same borrowed violin, but now it was hers. The program had given it to her permanently. She positioned the violin under her chin and closed her eyes for a moment. Then she began to play. The difference was remarkable. Her technique had improved dramatically. Smoother bowing, better intonation, more control. But she hadn't lost that raw emotional honesty that had broken Vincent's heart the first time. This piece was different from The Song of What Remains. That first piece had been about loss, about longing for home. This new composition started in a similar place with those same reaching phrases. But then it changed. The melody found moments of joy, not constant, not simple happiness, but real joy mixed with lingering sadness, like someone learning that you could carry grief and hope at the same time. There was a section that sounded like conversation. 2 voices played on one instrument. The old home talking to the new home. The past talking to the future, neither one winning, just both existing together. Vincent watched her play and thought about his own journey, about carrying the past while building something new, about how transformation didn't mean erasing who you'd been. It meant learning to be someone better while acknowledging all the years that came before. Layla played that one special note again, the one that had started everything, but this time it didn't waver. It was strong, sure, grounded, like someone who'd found their place to stand. The piece ended softly, gently, like a seed being planted. Like new roots taking hold, the audience erupted. People stood, cheered, wiped their eyes. Layla's grandmother was crying. Diane was crying. Vincent was crying again, but he wasn't embarrassed anymore. After the recital, people lingered, talking and laughing. Vincent found Layla near the refreshment table. "That was incredible," he told her. "Your new piece. It was perfect. I still made some mistakes," Layla said. "So did I, so does everyone. That's not what matters. My grandmother wants me to audition for the youth orchestra. She thinks I'm ready. Are you?" Layla smiled. "I don't know. But I want to try." Nina appeared beside Vincent, pulling him into a hug. "Dad, you were amazing." "I'm so proud of you. I messed up at least 5 times, I know. It was perfect." She pulled back, looking at him seriously. "Thank you for coming back. For being here. For trying. Thank you for giving me another chance." Rebecca joined them, a bit awkward but smiling. "Vincent, that was lovely, really." For a moment, the 3 of them stood together. Not a family anymore. Not in the traditional sense, but something. People who'd shared a life and were learning how to care about each other again. Vincent drove home late that night, exhausted but content. His apartment felt different now. Less empty. The piano no longer sat neglected in the corner. Sheet music covered the coffee table. Photos of Nina were displayed on the bookshelf. He made tea and sat by the window looking out at the city lights. His phone buzzed. A text from Tom. "Your piece about tonight's recital better be as good as your first one. Readers are waiting." Vincent smiled. He'd write it tomorrow. Another honest piece about music and transformation and being human. He thought about that first Saturday night. Walking into the church basement with cynicism and professional distance. Expecting nothing. Planning to write a dismissive review and leave. He thought about Layla's wavering note. About how one imperfect sound had cracked open something he'd kept locked for decades. Music had always been his life, but he'd spent 35 years hearing without listening, observing without feeling, analyzing without connecting. That one note hadn't just changed how he heard music, it had changed how he lived. Vincent picked up his phone and called Nina. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, everything okay?" "Everything's good. I just wanted to say goodnight, and that I love you." "I love you too, Dad." After they hung up, Vincent sat in the quiet, feeling grateful. Not for perfection, not for getting everything right, but for getting a second chance to actually be present in his own life. He'd thought he'd heard every tune, but it turned out he'd been listening to the wrong thing all along. Music wasn't about the notes. It was about what the notes made you feel. It was about connection, vulnerability, truth. It was about being human enough to let one imperfect note break through your walls and remind you what actually mattered. Vincent finally understood, and for the first time in 35 years he was really truly listening.